strategies and concepts discussed are for educational purposes only and do not represent specific investment, tax, or estate planning advice. Investing carries an inherent element of risk, and it is in everyone's best interest to consult a tax, legal, or investment professional. Beth Williams is an investment advisor representative of, and advisory services are offered through USA Financial Securities Corp., a registered investment advisor. Megan Carney, Megan S. Carney PLLC, and Financial Arts Builders are not affiliated with USA Financial Securities Corp.
Welcome to Money Healing. I'm your co-host, Beth Williams.
And I'm your other co-host, Megan Carney. We're here to talk about money and our feelings related to it. I'm a psychologist who specializes in helping sensitive people.
And I'm a financial planner. We both talk to everyday people just like you about these topics.
Everyone's mental health and money health journeys are so different. And as unique as we all are, there are some common themes when it comes to how our emotions impact our money and vice versa.
And it's those common themes that we are going to be discussing together, both the themes themselves and some ideas from us about how to move forward and heal your relationship with money.
Welcome back. If you missed our last episode, you heard my story. I'm Megan Carney, about my story related to money. And today we're here to hear more about Beth's money story. The reason we're sharing these with you is because we all have money stories, even if we don't realize it. And hopefully in hearing some of our stories, you'll start to realize what some of your stories, what some of the things you are telling yourself about money are. So Beth, I'm excited to jump in to your money story. So tell us about it.
Yeah, so I kind of like you, I would say that it comes into two quadrants. And I specifically have two stories that are instances that I go back to when I think about how I relate myself to money and how I think about money. And those really came down to those two different instances. So the first one was like my parents were blue collar workers. My dad was a power plant operator, and then my mom was and is a cop. And money wasn't like flowing all the time. It wasn't like we had a whole lot, but it wasn't that we were starving either. And I remember I was like 7 or 8 years old, somewhere in there, and we were at the Disney store. For those of you that grew up in the 90s, the Disney store. And we were with my aunt and my mom and my siblings and cousins. And one of the toys that came up was specifically for me, I love stuffed animals. And this was a stuffed animal that came up. And it was the cat from Pinocchio. And I love the book. I love Pinocchio. And so I find the cat and I just loved it. And I was just so excited about it. And I remember bringing it over to my mom and kind of asking her for the cat, the toy, and my heart just burst because she had this look on her face like she was about to cry. And I didn't know like what to do with that at that moment. And it was, I don't know, it was a moment where I all of a sudden realized while we were going through and looking at the store that we were in different financial brackets from my aunt and my cousins as compared to my mom and my siblings and I. And that became very clear to me. And just because she had this emotional response, it was so impactful to me at that age. I therefore did not want that experience ever again. And
Yeah.
it was really from there on that I was really careful to not ask for anything. And it wasn't anything that my parents did, never a guilt trip on asking for anything. But for me, I just felt that responsibility that I never, ever wanted my mom to have that experience. And it was through then that I started to understand how to be really grateful for what I have and not be necessarily wanting more. And it was really kind of impactful for me, for my aunt, my cousins, where they had, toys that they would get for Christmas and that kind of thing. And then it would be really exciting for a couple of days. And then it was, down by the wayside. And I didn't really have that because I just felt so much of the ownership that I had for what I had and just so grateful for what I did have. But that was a big motivator for me to start making my own money. And I started working, my first job was at 12 years old, and I was filing files for a doctor's office. And when you talked about 1,000 paper cuts, that's not funny. But it was genuinely like at 12, I started to bring in my own income and my own paychecks. And I've been working for 20 plus years. Ever since then, ever since 12, I've held at least one job every year. And I really felt like I wanted to not have my parents feel like I was a burden. So I remember that being a very big impact for me. And then my next story was about my ex. We are going to expand more on this in episode 5, where we're going to be talking about domestic violence and financial issues. And so I'll unpack a bit more about it. But the long story short, in this instance, just to focus on today, we were on our honeymoon and we had been given a very generous amount of cash for 2 college kids. And we were going to be just spending one night at like a hotel for our honeymoon. And I had to go back to work on Monday. And he had gotten fired from his job 3 weeks before we got married, which probably should have been just a giant red flag. But he and I were just like, as soon as we had gotten this cash from our wedding, I was like, oh, thank God, like we don't have to worry about the power bill and we don't have to worry about like food as much because we were just relying on my income alone. And I was working 3 jobs, and it was like a lot of pressure that all of a sudden I felt like was off of me. And I was just so grateful for my small town community and that amount that they had given us. And he, my ex came from a very different standard of living, and something that we'll talk more about in further episodes, and something that I talk a lot about with clients is your standard of living, because that was so big for he and I. So for him, he grew up with this higher standard of living than I did. I was fine with like off-brand cereal, and that kind of thing. And for him, he came from a higher standard of living. So we were constantly fighting about money. In this, on our honeymoon, we went to, I still remember this every time that I walk into a movie theater, we went to a movie. My parents, we never went to movies like growing up. And we just waited until, it came out on Blockbuster. Again, 90s reference. And we would just wait until then. So we never went to the movie theater. And we most certainly would have never gotten like popcorn and soda, right?
Mm-mm,
We go
mm-mm.
to this movie. Yeah, no, hard no. And we go to this movie, and I'm already feeling like, oh my God, like I don't want to be, dealing with this. And I'm like, it's fine. I'm trying to like calm myself down. I'm literally like starting to have a panic attack. And he's like, I'm gonna go run to the bathroom and I'll just join you in the theater. And so I'm in there and I'm trying to calm myself down, and I'm like, it's cool, it's fine, it's $20 or whatever it was. And he comes into the theater and he's got candy and popcorn and soda, like 2 for both of us. And I went into a complete panic. And it was like, I was so upset and so angry. And again, still every time that I walk into a movie theater, that comes back to me. And it was really through there that today for me in my process and what I focus on with clients is very much around that standard of living, because that was such a big deal with he and I. And then it was also just defining your values. If you value going to the movie, that's great. For me, I did not. And so it was such a big problem for us. And so I do focus very high on focusing on just defining what that is for you. Guilt aside, what is it? And I work with a lot of small business owners and young professionals, and we talk a lot about like your dream budget. Not what is it that you have now, but what do you want in the future? And that really helps to understand where I'm at today and not letting that get out of hand. But those are the 2 instances that just so clearly define me and like how I feel about money and how I think about money.
Yeah, and it's so interesting to hear you talk about it, because as you were saying some things, I was like, oh yeah, that's the thing for me too. And I really hope that our listeners are having a similar experience where you're just getting that little light bulb of like, oh yeah, I did that too, or I do that too. What's that about? So, knowing a bit more about your money story, I'm really curious about like how that's led into what you do now, who you work with.
So then for me, my typical client is around like 40 to 60 years old, and they're looking at the next phase of life, and they've usually gone through some sort of a change. So a parent passing, a relationship ending either through death or divorce. They got a new job or they're moving, and they are trying to figure out what that looks like on the other side of whatever that change is. But it's usually because of some change that they're reaching out to us. And
Mhm.
then they see, just for me, for my criteria, what I would say my, typical client, they see money as a tool. They do not see it as a scoreboard,
Mhm.
and they value experiences and making a difference in the world. And so that's typically the person that I'm working with. And what it's like to work with me is like, I want to go at your pace. We go very, very deep. And there's things that I would love for you to talk to your therapist about, and have your therapist in the room by all means. But it's like, and honestly, some of the best meetings I've ever had is when a client brings in their therapist and we go through questions like this. It's just so key to see where that emotional element of whatever it is that they're dealing with, that the therapist knows based on what I know with the numbers. Those are some of the best meetings I have. And we do really focus on getting to know you and your value system.
I'm just seeing again how, like, of course, we're doing this podcast together, you and I, right? We have so many similarities. Like, oh yeah, I didn't mention those things. My clients are also either just went through a big change or are considering a big change themselves. We go super deep. We go at the pace that you're able to go at, and that's usually slow to get deep. And I love that you will collaborate with others, right? Like bring in a therapist or bring in an attorney or another tax professional or something to really help everything go smoothly for your clients. Yeah. So your business, of course, supports you. It brings in money for you and your life. What is your money for?
Oh, great question. So I would say first and foremost, my money, like 3/4 of it just goes straight back into the business. Like it's just a funnel. Like I just, yeah, just send it straight back to the business. It's not just, office supplies, it's that kind of thing. There's staff that rely on me, and other people that rely on me to make money and to, give it over to them. But yeah, I would say 3/4 of it just goes straight back into the business. And then what's left goes towards groceries, and housing. I have college savings plans for, a bunch of young family members, and then 5 charities that I support. So again, the bulk of it goes straight back into the business, and then whatever's left goes to those things.
And when you talk about the money going back to the business, it's not just the business I'm hearing. I'm hearing these other people that you are supporting. And I actually hear a lot of your money going to other people, supporting others. And I have to ask, because this is a therapist in me, how much, maybe not a number, but are you giving yourself enough money to support yourself before you're supporting everybody else?
Just because of the training that we do go through in finance, it's very easy for me to draw those boundaries, and it's very easy for me to determine what that is. It's usually though, and I would say that this is the case with most people, life changes, and
Uh-huh.
so I can say yes, I'm not tying myself too tight in this element, and I'm making sure that I'm okay, but then things
Mhm.
change. I often say with clients that when I'm working with them on their budget, that there's just a couple of rules that I put down together as just ground rules. And one of them is every month is an exception month. And so
Mhm.
therefore every year is an exception year. And it's just because, oh, there was Christmas or there was a birthday or I had a family member that fell ill and I had to take an emergency trip, so there's always something that's an emergency that comes up. But yes, I would say by and large, that's something that I thank my training for.
That's awesome. And I love how you framed it as a boundary. So many people don't see that that's what it is. And most of my clients, like that undoubtedly becomes what we're working on too, is taking care of yourself financially, emotionally, in relation to other people, physically, really is all about boundaries. So, what helped you get to this point where you can have these boundaries around money? What helped you in working on healing your money stories?
I would say therapy. Honestly,
Yay, therapy.
get a therapist. It was really funny because coming out of a domestic violence situation for sure, where there was financial trauma that was mixed in, it was because of having someone that could work through what is going on emotionally first, even though I wouldn't have been able to articulate it back then until you and I started talking about how the money really is so much tied up into the emotions that we're dealing with, positive or negative. But I would say that was a huge movement for me. And then also just knowledge for me, understanding what it is, how financial things work, how financial operations, work within our daily lives, and just understanding all of that. It's not for everybody, but because I have had an extensive amount of training, that's been very easy for me to look at it as not something that's reflected on me, but just something that's a tool. And so that's really easy for me to distinguish between the two, just because of that training.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Money Healing, hearing Beth's story and maybe sparking some light bulbs for yourself. We hope you enjoy our next episode, where we'll be discussing what, Beth?
We will be discussing our relationships to financial advisors and some of the transparency issues within our industry.
Ooh, transparency. Favorite topic of mine, of course, connected to trauma. You can connect more with me at my website, meganscarney.com. We'll link that below. And also with Beth at her website, Financial Arc Builders, right, Beth?
Yep, financialarcbuilders.com.
Excellent. We'll see you or hear you. No, you'll hear us on our next episode.